the zipper on the garment bag. Caught the third time, Isla Mercer tried to open it, and she stood in the narrow bathroom of the Fairmont's employee entrance, tugging at it with 2 fingers, while the fluorescent light above her buzzed and flickered like it couldn't quite commit to staying on. She got the bag open. She shook out the dress, navy wool crepe, fitted, no embellishment, and hung it on the back of the door. She had 40 minutes before the doors to the Pemberton Hall Grand Ballroom opened for the Carver Foundation's annual gala. She had 40 minutes, and she had been planning this evening for 11 months. She did not look nervous. That was the thing about Isla. She never looked like anything she didn't intend to look like. Outside that bathroom door, on the other side of the hotel's service corridor, the Carver Foundation Gala was the most anticipated charitable event in Calgary that year. The guest list was printed on cream stock with a blind emboss. The centerpieces alone had cost what a junior associate at a mid-size firm makes in a month. The Whitfield-Crane family had underwritten the event as they underwrote most things in this city that bore a name worth keeping. Their real estate portfolio ran from the Beltline to the Bow River. Their charitable arm was photographed at every ribbon cutting between here and Vancouver, and their patriarch, Gordon Whitfield-Crane, had shaken hands with 2 prime ministers and accepted an Order of Canada that his press secretary had angled for over the better part of a decade. The family was known. The family was loved. The family was, as one Society columnist had written the previous spring, the kind of Canadians we aspire to be. Isla Mercer had read that column. She had read it twice, actually, and then she had filed it in a folder on her desktop, between a PDF of the Carver Foundation's most recent audited financial statements and a screenshot of a wire transfer confirmation dated 14 months prior. She zipped the garment bag, folded it over her arm, and walked out into the corridor. You need to understand something about the Whitfield-Crane family before you understand what happened that evening. You need to understand what they looked like from the outside, because the outside was the only thing they had ever bothered to maintain. Gordon Whitfield-Crane was 71, silver-haired, and had the particular ease of a man who had never once been told no by someone he respected. His wife, Helena Whitfield-Crane, ran the family's philanthropic arm with the precision of a woman who understood that charity, done correctly, is indistinguishable from branding. Their son, Preston Whitfield-Crane, was 38, recently photographed at a Whistler fundraiser, with his hand on the small of a woman who was not his wife, and had recently been made managing partner of Whitfield-Crane Capital Partners. A promotion Gordon had announced at a dinner that Preston had not been present for, having flown to Scottsdale that morning for reasons that were described publicly as a prior commitment. Preston's wife, Audrey Whitfield-Crane, was the one who made the seating chart for the gala. She was also the one who, 4 years earlier, had championed the redevelopment of a mixed-income housing block on Edmonton Trail that her father-in-law's company had purchased, rezoned, and converted into luxury condominiums starting at $1.4 million. The families who had lived in those units, 41 households, several of whom had been there for more than 2 decades, had received letters on a Wednesday. They were out by the following month. The Carver Foundation, to its considerable credit, had donated $50,000 to a housing assistance fund that year. Gordon had presented the check at a gala very much like this one. There had been photographs. None of this was secret. All of it was simply arranged, filed in the correct drawers, kept in the correct rooms. The Whitfield-Crane name was on a children's wing at the Foothills Hospital. It was on a scholarship at the University of Calgary. It was on a plaque outside a community garden in Inglewood that Helena had championed in a year when the family needed the kind of press that photographs well in natural light. The name was everywhere. The family was beloved, and the city, by and large, was happy to let the arrangement stand. Isla Mercer had not been happy with it for quite some time. She arrived at the hotel's main entrance at 6:47 p.m. The valet line was already 3 deep with black SUVs. A woman in a fur-trimmed coat was being helped out of a town car by a man who appeared to be her husband but moved like hired staff. The doors to the Fairmont's lobby were propped open, and from inside came the particular sound of a string quartet, something tasteful at a volume low enough to suggest it was there to be noticed, not heard. Isla handed the valet nothing. She had taken a cab and walked to the entrance. She was wearing the navy dress. She had her hair pulled back. She was carrying a small clutch, and on her left hand she wore a ring that had belonged to her grandmother. A simple gold band with a single freshwater pearl set in a plain prong setting. Not flashy, not expensive looking. She had worn it deliberately. The woman at the check-in table looked at Isla the way certain people look at things they don't immediately know how to categorize. "Name?" she said. "Mercer, Isla Mercer." The woman ran her finger down the list. She ran it down again. I'm sorry, I don't see. It may be under my company. Meridian Equity Partners." The finger stopped. The woman looked up. Something in her expression shifted slightly, like a door opening a crack, and then deciding to stay where it was. "I'll need to check with our coordinator," she said. "Of course," Isla said. She waited. She was very good at waiting. A man in a black tuxedo appeared. He introduced himself as the events coordinator and asked her to follow him to a side table, away from the main check-in flow, where things could be sorted out quietly. The phrasing, "sorted out quietly," was delivered with a particular brand of courtesy that has sorting out and moving along as its true intention. "I can assure you the invitation was received," Isla said. She opened her clutch and produced a printed copy. She also produced beneath it a folded letter on Meridian Equity Partners letterhead. She set both on the table without comment. The coordinator looked at the invitation. He looked at the letter. He looked at Isla. "I apologize for the confusion," he said, and his tone had changed in the way tones do when paperwork says something the face did not expect. "Please, right this way." She walked through the doors into the ballroom. The Pemberton Hall Ballroom at the Calgary Fairmont was, by any standard, a beautiful room. The ceiling was coffered and gold-leafed. The chandeliers were original fixtures restored in 2019. And the flooring was a herringbone parquet that had been buffed to the kind of shine that reflects champagne flutes. Round tables dressed in ivory linen were arranged with the precision of people who have been paid to think about such things. At the front of the room, a low stage held a podium, with the Carver Foundation's logo lit from below. The room was already a third full. People moved in that particular gala way. Not quite mingling, not quite posturing, the drift that happens when everyone present already knows everyone else, and the event is less a gathering than a confirmation of existing arrangements. Isla took a glass of water from a passing tray. She stood near the edge of the room. She did not look around with the eagerness of someone unfamiliar. She looked around with the attention of someone who is counting things. She saw Gordon Whitfield-Crane near the bar, shaking hands with a man she recognized from the board of the Calgary Foundation. She saw Helena at a table with two other women, all three of them wearing jewelry that cost more than Isla's first car. She saw Preston across the room, talking to a younger man she didn't know, laughing at something with the specific performative ease of someone who has spent his whole life in rooms like this one and has never once felt unwelcome in any of them. She found her table. She sat down. The woman to her left introduced herself as the executive director of a mid-sized nonprofit that partnered with the foundation. They talked for a few minutes about funding cycles. The woman was sharp and kind, and Isla liked her immediately. This sometimes happened at events like this. You found the real ones mixed in with the arrangement, the people who were there because they actually cared about the thing, not because the thing served them. Dinner was served. The salad course was a beet and arugula composition that Isla ate entirely. The salmon was slightly overdone. The speeches began at 8:15. Gordon Whitfield-Crane spoke for 9 minutes about legacy and community, and the responsibility of those fortunate enough to have resources. He used the word stewardship 4 times. He thanked the foundation board. the event sponsors, the staff. He thanked, with a slight pause before he said it, the many partners whose support makes this work possible. He did not specify which partners. He never did. Helena accepted a framed recognition certificate on behalf of the family's philanthropic arm. There was sustained applause. A photograph was taken. The foundation's executive director closed the formal program and invited everyone to continue the evening. The string quartet shifted to something slightly more upbeat. The bar filled. People began moving again in that drifting way, and that was when Preston Whitfield-Crane walked across the room toward Isla Mercer's table. She had not sought him out. She had known, statistically, that the evening would surface some version of this. Had known it in the way you know a weather forecast is probable, even before you feel it in the air. But she had not arranged it. She had simply been present, which was all she had ever needed to be. Preston arrived with a glass of bourbon and a man she did not know, and he stopped at the edge of her table, with a look on his face that was trying very hard to be cordial. "I don't believe we've met," he said. "Isla Mercer," she said. She did not stand. Preston Whitfield-Crane. He said his own name the way some people say grace, automatic, practiced, a formality that still somehow implies gratitude for its own existence. "And you're here with Meridian Equity Partners." Something passed across his face. Not recognition exactly. More like the beginning of recognition that got interrupted by something else, a calculation maybe, or a reflex. "Right," he said. "The equity firm, that's the one." He was still standing. She was still sitting. The friend he'd brought had already lost interest and drifted off toward the bar. "My father's mentioned," Preston began. "He has," Isla said. "We've spoken several times. He's been very gracious." Sure. He swirled the bourbon. "I didn't realize you'd be here tonight. I was invited," she said. "I come every year." This was true. She had attended this gala for 3 consecutive years. She had been at a table in the back the first year, a table in the middle the second, and now here. 4 tables from the stage, which was not an accident. The seating chart was weighted by contribution level, and her contribution level had changed considerably in the past 14 months. Preston didn't know this. Preston, as far as Isla had been able to determine, did not know very much about the actual financial architecture of several things that bore his family's name. That was not unusual. It was, in fact, precisely the kind of not knowing that Isla had spent 14 months quietly, carefully, learning how to become indispensable inside. "Well," Preston said, in the voice men use when they have run out of things to say but are not ready to leave, "enjoy the evening." "Thank you," she said. "I plan to." He walked away. She watched him go. Then she picked up her water glass and held it at a slight angle, and in the reflection of the chandelier light on the surface, she watched the room behind her, without looking like she was watching anything at all. It happened at 9:23 p.m. She knew the time, because she had checked her phone 30 seconds earlier, responding to a message from her office. The phone was still in her hand, face down, when Helena Whitfield-Crane moved through the section of the room between the east bar and the main doors, a tight corridor of space made tighter by the late evening crowd, and the collision happened. It was not, technically, a shove. Isla was always careful about words, and shove implies intent, which was impossible to prove in the moment. What happened was this. Helena moved through the crowd quickly, in the way of someone who is accustomed to space clearing for her, who does not particularly think about whether space has cleared before moving into it. Isla was standing at the edge of her table, slightly turned, responding to the same message. Helena walked into her with her right shoulder, and the force of it. Helena was a substantial woman, moving with momentum, turned Isla sideways, and the phone hit the floor, and the pearl ring, catching on the edge of the table, snaps free from its setting, and the single pearl rolled across the parquet floor and came to rest under the table next to hers. The moment lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then Helena looked at Isla, really looked, for the first time, that evening. The way you look at something you've bumped into, and Something moved through her expression that was not quite guilt and not quite recognition and was actually, if you knew how to read it, something closer to dismissal. "Watch where you're standing," Helena said. The room, or at least the 8 or 10 people immediately surrounding them, went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when something has been said out loud that is understood by everyone present to be a different thing than what it sounds like. Isla looked at Helena. She did not look at the phone on the floor, or at the empty ring setting, or at the people around them. She looked at Helena with a steadiness that had no performance in it, which was its own kind of answer. "I was standing at my table," Isla said. "Your table," Helena repeated. The tone was not quite a question. "Table 7, Isla said. "I believe it's on the seating chart." A woman nearby bent down and picked up the pearl from the floor. She held it out to Isla without saying anything. Isla took it and put it in her clutch and picked up her phone from the floor herself and set it on the table face up. The room had not returned to normal yet. That particular quiet was still there, occupying the space between things. Helena looked at Isla for one more moment, then she walked away, and Isla sat back down and picked up her water glass, and the pearl in her clutch caught the light from the chandelier through the thin fabric and made a small bright shape there. And she breathed in once through her nose slowly and let the moment settle. What Helena Whitfield-Crane did not know, at 9:23 p.m., at the Carver Foundation Gala, standing in the Pemberton Hall ballroom of the Calgary Fairmont, she did not know that Meridian Equity Partners held a significant minority position in the trust that managed the long-term financing of Whitfield-Crane Capital's flagship redevelopment project on the north shore of the Bow River, a $340 million mixed-use development called Criterion, which had been in the permitting and pre-construction phase for the past 2 years and was the centerpiece of what Gordon Whitfield-Crane had described in a feature profile in the Globe and Mail's report on business as the most important project of our family's legacy. She did not know that the trust structure, assembled by lawyers and advisors who had been selected by Gordon, not by her, and whose internal communications she had never seen, had a clause in it that was, by any reasonable reading, a standard protective mechanism for minority investors. The clause was 15 lines long. It was not secret. It was in the agreement that had been signed in a boardroom in downtown Calgary 14 months prior at a meeting attended by Gordon, by Preston, by 3 lawyers, and by Isla Mercer, who had flown in from Toronto the night before and taken a cab directly from the airport to the building. She did not know that Isla, in the 14 months since that signing, had quietly become one of 2 investors whose continued participation was structurally necessary for Criterion to proceed through its next phase of financing, the phase that was scheduled to close in 6 weeks. She did not know any of this. Gordon knew pieces of it. Preston knew the name Meridian, and knew it was some equity firm, and knew his father considered them important, in the vague way that money can be important without being present in the room. And Isla, who had known all of this since before she flew to Calgary for the first time, had also known, for quite some time, that there would be an evening like this one. There would be an evening when the arrangement became visible from a different angle, when the people who occupied the room so easily, who moved through it with such certainty, would look at her with that particular look, the look that takes a quick accounting and finds insufficient, and she would be standing close enough to the table that her pearl could hit the floor. She had simply waited for it, and when it came, she had not flinched, or cried, or made a scene, because none of those things were necessary. The situation did not require her emotion. It required her patience, which she had in abundance. The gala ended at 11. People filtered out in the slow tide of late evenings. Coats retrieved, taxis called, small conversations wound down at the edges of the room. The string quartet packed up. The centerpieces were claimed by volunteers. Isla waited until the room was mostly empty. Then she gathered her clutch and her coat and walked to the front table, where the foundation's executive director was reviewing some notes with a junior staff member.
Ms. Mercer,
the director said, looking up.
Thank you so much for coming.
Of course. Isla shook her hand. Lovely evening. I wanted to let you know, I've spoken with my office, and we've finalized our commitment for next year's program. You should expect the formal letter by the end of the month. The director's expression did something complicated that resolved into genuine warmth. That's wonderful news. Thank you. The Housing Transition Fund is important work, Isla said. I wanted to make sure it continues. She said goodnight and walked through the lobby and stepped out into the February air on the east side of the Fairmont. The temperature had dropped to -12. The street was quiet in the particular way of a Calgary winter night. Not still, exactly, but muffled, the cold pressing sound down close to the ground. She called a cab. While she waited, she opened her clutch and took out the pearl. It sat on her palm, small and white, catching the light from the hotel's entrance. The prongs that had held it were bent. The ring itself was probably fixable, but it would need a jeweler. She curled her fingers around the pearl and put it back in the clutch. The cab came 8 minutes later. She got in, gave the address of her hotel, and looked out the window as the city moved past in the dark. 31 days later, the Financial News reported that a significant financing condition for Criterion, the Whitfield-Crane Capital flagship redevelopment project on the Bow River's north shore, had not been met ahead of the scheduled close date. The project, according to a statement issued through the company's communications office, was under review. 2 institutional partners had withdrawn in the same week. A third had requested an audit of the trust structure before any further commitments were made. The story ran in the Calgary Herald on a Tuesday. It was picked up by the Globe and Mail's report on business the following Thursday. It was not a large story, it was a quiet one. The kind of story that sits in the business section and is read by a specific type of person for a specific type of reason. Gordon Whitfield-Crane released a statement saying that the family remained committed to Criterion and was actively engaged with financing partners to find a clear path forward. His communications team was excellent, and the statement was perfectly balanced. Confident enough to steady existing investors, humble enough not to antagonize anyone who might still be watching. No one mentioned Meridian Equity Partners. Isla had not asked them to. She had not, in fact, made any public statement at all. Meridian's withdrawal had been communicated in a letter. The kind of letter that contains no accusation because no accusation is necessary. Because the letter itself, by its existence, says the thing that needed to be said. Preston Whitfield-Crane called her twice in the week after the story broke. She returned neither call. There was nothing to discuss. The agreement had a process, and she was following the process. Everything was documented. Everything had always been documented. That was simply how she worked. The Criterion site sat fenced and quiet through the spring thaw. The hoarding around its perimeter bore a rendering of what it was meant to become. Glass towers, a riverfront promenade, renderings of young smiling people on patios. The rendering stayed there for a long time. No one came to take it down. In June, a community organization in the northeast part of the city announced a partnership with a new investment group to develop affordable rental housing on a parcel of land in the area, land that had been quietly acquired over the preceding year through a series of transactions that no one had found particularly notable at the time. The project would provide 94 units of purpose-built affordable housing. A groundbreaking was scheduled for the fall. The organization's executive director, who had been working in community housing for over a decade and had attended a gala in February where she had sat next to a woman she immediately liked, would later describe the investment group behind the project as exactly the kind of partner we'd been looking for. The investment group did not issue a press release. There was no photograph. The executive director's organization sent out a brief newsletter to its community members, and one of the staff members shared it on social media. And it got 240 likes, which was a good number for a housing nonprofit's social media post. On the day the groundbreaking was announced, Isla Mercer was in her office in Toronto, reviewing contracts for a project in Halifax. She saw the newsletter shared in her email. She read it, and read the director's quote, and let out a long breath that she hadn't entirely realized she'd been holding. She picked up the pearl from her desk. She'd had the ring repaired in March, but had taken the pearl out of it and kept it separate, for reasons she hadn't entirely examined, and set it on top of the newsletter printout she'd made, and looked at both of them for a moment. Then she put the pearl in her desk drawer, closed it, and went back to the Halifax contracts. There are people who do the things that need to be done, and there are people who are photographed doing them. Isla Mercer had always known which one she was. It had never bothered her. The work was the work. The work was what remained. The chandelier in the Pemberton Hall ballroom, 2,000 kilometers away, was still lit, still gold, still reflected in the parquet floor below it, throwing light in patterns that had nothing to do with who was standing underneath. The pearl was in the drawer. The work continued, and somewhere in that city, 94 families would have a place to live. That was enough. That had always been enough.